Friday, October 7th on Wacana English edition. All eyes are on Malaysian Parliament where the highly anticipated Budget 2023 is being tabled. However, this year's budget comes with added uncertainty as talks of dissolving Parliament take centre stage with politicised calls for an early general election despite wider concerns around flooding. Will this budget be geared towards the upcoming general election or will it lean towards preparations for a challenging economic year? Join me, Tamina Kausji, and our panel of experts this Friday at 8:30 p.m. as we review Budget 2023 while also discussing the reality that we may be crossing our GE15 ballots before the year ends. Live on sinardaily.my as well as Sinar Daily's Facebook page.
Good evening, everyone. This is Wacana English Edition, and I'm Tamina Kausji, taking you through another episode of the show that gives our international as well as English-speaking viewers insights on Malaysia's social, political, and of course, economic landscape. So it's been a budget kind of Friday with Budget 2023 just tabled, but at the same time, in the not forgotten either, chatter of perhaps an early general election still being called, Parliament perhaps being dissolved. All of that is on the cards for today's discussion. And of course, our Budget 2023 has been tabled at 372.34 billion ringgit, Malaysia's second largest ever, and also an increase of about 12% up from last year's budget. So, with that in mind, I'm very happy to welcome our panelists joining us in studio as well as online, beginning with Deputy National Unity Minister, Yang Berhormat Senator Wan Ahmad Faisal.
Thank you, Tamina.
Together also with Bakri Member of Parliament and also former Minister of Science, Technology and Innovation, Yang Berhormat Yobi Yin.
Hi.
And joining us online, economist Professor Joe Mokwami Sundram. Hi, Prof. Good evening.
Good evening.
Right, lovely to have you all with us here, especially on this very special Friday evening. I'd like to start off by going through Budget 2023's theme as well as focus. Do we feel that it maintains the government's core objective of rebuilding and strengthening the country's economy post-pandemic? Would you like to go first, YB?
Overall, I think the budget is very big and very generous in many ways. Some of the things, big handouts, of course, because it is election. Whether we will pass the budget or not, it is undeniably an election budget. So there is a lot of handouts, but those handouts can also help to stimulate the economy in one way or another. We just bear in mind that cash transfers to lower parts of the income groups will actually go into the economy more than it goes to the up. So sometimes the election budget can also help to stimulate the economy. It's just that whether it's effective or not. But politically, it is something we need to accept that this is an election budget and this is how it would be. Whereas for other parts of the budget, I have one of the theme was reformist and about the budget, but I have not seen anything reformist about this budget. It is to me more of a business as usual ones, but a bigger scale. And a bit lack of imagination of what the government will do to the economy.
Very interesting thoughts there.
Yeah.
Thank you, YB. Senator, your immediate thoughts.
Yeah, I would like to echo YB Yobi Yin's comment as well. This is heavily leaning towards election rather than what the Minister of Finance planned to address. I don't see any shape of resiliency when it comes to pushing this budget, except a mere continuation of what had been tabled before, since last year. And I think the litmus test for this budget is not really about announcing, but how you deliver and execute it. I think these are the major issues, I think, always hampering the good vibes of the budget every time we table it year in, year out, annually. So I think, of course, I have to give a good remark to the civil servants from Ministry of Finance who have been tirelessly preparing this budget. But at the same time, the real efficiency of this budget that we must address or must be observed is how the budget will be squared with our 12 Malaysian plan. I think that surely will definitely determine whether the budget is going to be beneficial to the people at large and the country as a whole.
Fairly observed, Senator, because obviously if the caretaker government has also passed the budget, it's also all about executing the budget as well. Back to Professor Jomo. Jomo, Prof, I would like to ask you about how much of this budget is actually rational, considering the wider challenges of a possible global recession and, of course, imminent flooding.
Thank you very much, Temina. I think the two politicians have reminded us that this is essentially an election budget. But having said that, I think it is, from a political point of view, it's a rather curious election budget. While it is quite generous in terms of handouts to a number of groups, it also has two major problems. The first major problem, of course, is that it does the reforms which Liz Truss, or the current UK government, recently undertook in terms of tax cuts. And this was also pursued by President Trump during his tenure. So you have tax cuts on the one hand, in other words, less revenue for government, because this government has refused to, for example, introduce windfall taxes, despite the fact that huge incomes have come in for certain sectors of the population. But the other major problem, of course, is that we have a situation where over several years now, the government has been borrowing more and more and more. And a lot of it doesn't even go to Parliament, because a lot of it is government guaranteed contingent liabilities undertaken by, for example, Dana Infra and a bunch of other government-linked companies. And there seems to be no sense of concern that we are simply kicking the can down the road and passing the debt to the next generation. So you have a very curious situation where a huge number of young people are going to be voting for the very first time. And you basically have an election which tells them that they and future generations will be paying off the debt, because all this debt is on the books, on the government's books, and some of it is government guaranteed and doesn't even go to Parliament, but nonetheless needs to be paid for by the government. So it's a very strange budget by any political standards, as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you for that, Prof. Jomo. And certainly, we will go back into that and go even deeper. But currently, as of June 2022, our public debt amounts up to 1.44 trillion, which is almost 85% of our GDP, right? Now, back to the floor here. I would like to ask about the fact that it's quite undeniable that we're seeing everywhere signs in nature, all the way from elephants in Kelantan moving to higher grounds that we've seen documented in news reports over the past few days. It does seem like floods are definitely rolling around. Meanwhile, instead of flood mitigation strategies, Malaysian politics is rife with rumors of when GE15 will be held. Thoughts on this? Senator, perhaps?
I think my party and all the ministers from Perikatan Nasional had made it very clear to the public and to the king himself that we unanimously oppose any attempt to dissolve the parliament. And it's quite weird, and I must say, for those cabinet members to openly wrote a letter to the king to express their concern. And because we all know the decision has been made by UMNO, especially the president, Datuk Sri Ahmad Zahid Hamidi, who is pretty much hell-bent to make sure the prime minister, who is his vice president, to toe the party line and dissolve the parliament at all costs, despite knowing we are already entering monsoon season. I think this is something very concerning for all of us in the parliament, even the Rakyat at large, because if they still pursue to dissolve the parliament next week, what does it mean, whatever being tabled just now? Are you trying to say those are only lies, white lies to the people, to the voters? I think these are something that we are very much concerned, and from Perikatan Nasional side, we oppose this.
All right, thank you for that, Senator. And YB, your thoughts on the same, but of course, drawing also from the fact that UMNO hardly holds any majority of parliamentary seats.
Yeah, but I think they will try their best. Political, I don't know, this is a budget talk, but we talk a little bit about politics because sometimes I just feel that today we talk about budget, it probably become pointless by next week. We talk because by next week, let's say if there is a dissolution, then the parliament will to come back to pass another budget, if there is a new Ministry of Finance, etc., or new government. So I think at this moment, as everyone knows, Pakatan Harapan as well do not agree with the going for election at end of the year. But I'm more concerned about whether or not we are prepared to face the flood. Just now you were saying that this budget is related to the flood. Actually, it is not. This budget is for next year. So what is this year is whatever that they have been budgeted for and they have prepared. And my worry is execution, like what the Senator has said. My worry is not how much you have, you are here, you show all your assets, whether the assets can work, when there is a time that matters. But in the long term, Malaysia has to move more scientifically and systematically in handling flood. How do we simulate the rising sea level, and how do we know in which part of the country will have problems, and do we have risk analytics? Today I just checked on the infrastructure on the water, drainage and saliran, so I find out that you budget something, but are they used at the right place? With the right technology, at all those. So I think sometimes politicians like to announce big budget. Oh, you have flood. So today I'm just going to put on another, I think the budget was 15 billion until 2030 or something along. So I tell you, I'm just going to give you a lot of money. But where do you spend the money? You spend the money scientifically according to what science tells you where to do and what to do, or just spend the money for the sake of spending money. So a lot of the time, politicians give a solution on the monetary, but not giving a solution on what exactly that there is needed. So I think the Water Ministry really needs to come up with a more comprehensive plan in flood mitigation than telling us how much you are going to put up. Because it doesn't really matter how much if you spend on the wrong place. Coming back to the current season, the most important thing is how you are prepared to face the flood.
Certainly. And
because your drainage, all that infrastructure is already something you can't change, but how do you face the flood?
And arguably, we've also had almost a year and running since the big floods of 2021 December.
Yeah.
Right. So now a question for Professor Jomo, and this is about wider democratic ideals, Prof. Shouldn't democracy mean decentralizing power rather than centralizing it? And do you feel any political party in Malaysia currently has a roadmap working towards this at least?
I'm not so sure that decentralization is the greatest priority in the country. If you look, for example, at the most decentralized country in the region, it's probably the Philippines. And in the Philippines, you have elections right down to the village level. And what you have there is a situation where the local powers dominate, and there is a great deal of seepage as a consequence. So if I get elected head of this council, I appoint my brother-in-law as a head of police, I appoint this, and so on and so forth. So I think a lot depends on how decentralization continues. And I think what is important is to have meaningful devolution to ensure a greater accountability. The kind of accountability which simply comes about from formal decentralization is not necessarily in our best interest. Having said that, I think there has to be a strong case made for the rights of the people of Sabah and Sarawak, because these were promises which were made quite some time ago, and there has to be greater sensitivity to the variety of interests. I mean, look, for example, at the discrimination against the people of Kelantan, recognized as the poorest state in the country for a long time, but look at the number of seats they have in parliament, and look at the number of the amount of money they get. they've had a long-standing problem of not being able to solve a variety of water problems, poor water coming out of the water system, very poor sanitation, and also regular floods. But none of these problems have actually been addressed by the federal government, even when the federal government has ruled at the state level. So we have a situation where there are favorites and and it is the federal government which controls the purse strings. But it's not necessarily the case that if you have devolution, you will necessarily have superior governance. You need to ensure that the local level governance is superior and accountable. And this, unfortunately, is not provided for by the existing constitution at the national level as well as at the state level.
About localizing government elections, etc., and whether that may or may not work in a broader context for Malaysia itself. Right. A broader political question as well now. How about, having the sort of campaign for forthcoming general elections where it's more about voting for the person, not the party? Do you think something like that would be able to work in Malaysia for GE15, particularly considering that now we've got an entire Undi 18 related demographic of much younger voters? YB?
I would say I hope the country moves towards voting for policy. Voting based on what policies a particular party stands for than other things. I think if you look around the world, there are many countries that actually people are still voting for the party, but they are voting for the party because of the position they take in policies. For example, what is our healthcare policy? What is our environment policy, economic policy? And that it is less so about personality. I am very afraid that to look into the trend of politics in Malaysia, whereby voters are looking for superheroes, where we know that politicians are people with weakness. I will be very grateful if they are not corrupt. So you got what I mean? So people are looking for superheroes, but superheroes will not save the country. A strong institution will save the country. And strong institutions come from policy. How do we place the right policies and build the institution? So when I was a minister, that is what we did. For example, I just give a very simple example where we return the foreign plastics waste back to the country of origin. But what we did that time was that we also put down all the procedures and institutionalized procedures for all the agencies. By the time I left office, it's 100 plus containers being sent back. But after 2 years, there are more than 250 containers sent back because we institutionalized procedures. I think politics in Malaysia must move towards building institution that is longer than your time in office. Building institution that is longer than the time you are government. That will be more, to me, will be my priority of what I want to see of the future of politics in Malaysia.
Definitely, hearing you loud and clear on that. And very quickly, the same towards you, Senator, voting for perhaps the person, not the party. Your thoughts on that?
I think first and foremost, we need to acknowledge that post-GE14 and also post-Sheraton move, there's a political fatigueness engulfing the whole nation. And we all know that because of that, most voters, young voters especially, are fed up, disillusioned, and perhaps they are mulling the option of not voting next coming election. And also due to that effect, I believe now the trend is, as what you rightly commented, moving towards more of a praising personality rather than a party. But as much as I would like to agree with Yang Muhammad Yobiyin, I must say that we are, as Malaysians, still very much influenced by identity politics. Yes, I would love to see more Malay parties focusing on policies. Definitely they are doing that as well. But underlying those substantial debate on policies, one cannot run away from race and religious ethos when it comes to positioning certain matters like cultural matters. Those are part of policy as well, and institutions. So I believe we must balance them. And of course, as time goes by, I believe the society will mature, the democracy will become more substantive, and hopefully, as what YB aspire, I also like to see people vote based on policy line rather than merely I'm a Malay or Malay majority party or Islamist party and others.
Well, now's definitely the time and the election to try that out. We'll take a quick break, but we'll be back right after for this edition of Wacana English Edition. Don't go anywhere.
My father jumped out of UMNO, and then there was a lot of speculations involved. So, but for the beneficiary of the party, they've decided to suspend in order to remove any suspicions within the party.
I'm the co-CEO of Bits Media. So Bits Media is the creator and developer of the Muslim Pro lifestyle mobile app, which is the #1 global app for the Muslim community. And as we like to say, the home of all things digital for the Muslims.
The biggest challenge that we have currently is the awareness that SMEs can export to the world in a cost-effective manner, and eBay is there to provide support to them. This awareness is not there with most of the SMEs, and our endeavor is to increase this awareness, one through this report and two with various engagements that we have with governmental agencies or the other nodal agencies that expand and increase the awareness of exports. From that point of view, I think we provide a unique platform, and SMEs are taking advantage of this. Through this advantage, Singapore and Malaysia have reached 86 and 81% of SMEs exporting to the world.
Welcome back to Wacana English Edition. Still with me, Tamina Kausji, and today's show, of course, is focusing on Budget 2023. I'd like to pose the first question for this segment towards Prof. Jomo. Now, Prof. Jomo, of course, we've got a very, very large outlay of plenty of subsidies, but how is the government going to be paying for these subsidies, in your opinion? And is that going to lead us even deeper into the cycle that you'd mentioned before of public debt?
Well, this is the $64 million question, or the $64 billion question, because clearly there is no funding strategy. There are tax cuts, which basically means less revenue for government, no indication of any additional revenue sources for the government, and increased spending. Perhaps not as much increase as last year, but still, nonetheless, very significant increases. And this, of course, poses the problem of how you're going to pay for it. And it's very clear from what has happened in the last 2 or 3 years, and especially before that this is going to be passed on to future generations. Look at the funding model, for example, for the East Coast Railway link. You know, you basically don't start paying for the first 7 years or so, and then you start paying, and you pay for a project which would cost 17 billion. According to my engineering friends, the people of Malaysia will end up paying over 100 billion if the deal was not revised. Of course, the deal has since been revised, but not very, very significantly. So this has been the model. It was the model with 1 MDB. It is a model, and this is why I emphasize, although we are talking about a couple of 100 billion at this point, we have to pay attention to what is happening. And currently, the Constitution does not, and the law does not require borrowings by government-linked companies to be made accountable to government, even though the government will end up paying the bills. And this is a very, very major problem with the current parliamentary system, a very major gap in accountability as well as in transparency.
Thank you for that, Prof. Jomo. And the same question, but also looking at the fact that whether it feels fiscally irresponsible, perhaps, to be putting forward such a budget?
To me, I mean, this is an election budget, so any political party may do so. But my problem with that is that our debt servicing charges has been increasing, although this year it's dropped a little bit. I'm very, very concerned. If you look at the budget book, I just have a flip through because we just had it
yes.
this evening. I just had a flip through. The interest that we need to pay because our debt has reached 1 trillion. Every year we have to pay 46 billion in interest, not even principal, in interest. And 46 billion is half of the expenditure, development expenditure, 92 billion this year, which is the highest in history. That means that we actually, because of the debt burden, we are not only talking about how does the next generation going to pay for the principal, we are also talking about how much of the opportunity cost lost because we need to serve the debt services charge. The other part that we need to see, and in the budget book, I've just flipped through, and they have shown a comparison between debt service charges versus the revenue of the government versus the other countries. And one interesting comparison was with Singapore. Singapore had a much larger debt versus of the GDP, but their debt service charges to revenue, government revenue ratio is almost zero. Why? They use the debt for reinvestment, which give them more money than what they need to pay of the interest of the debt. Whereas for us, we earn money, we loan money, borrow money for what? To spend. The moment you borrow money to spend and not to reinvest, that is when your debt service charges to revenue increase. And I just give you, it is more than 16% of the total revenue that we need to spend on debt service charge. That is very scary. And I have seen the DH actually break it down. 46 billion, what does 46 billion means, right?
Exactly.
So that means every single second, Malaysian needs to pay 1,367 ringgit every single second for interest. That because of the debt we hold. Of course, the other part is the contingent liability that Prof has already mentioned.
That's right.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for elaborating a little bit further on that. Senator, when it comes to the fact that Malaysia is expecting to spend a record 80 billion ringgit in subsidies this year, and of course that expenditure is forecast to increase, what with the entire rising global inflation. What about the need for revenue-raising initiatives? Do you see any efforts being put towards that to help perhaps balance it out?
Honestly, from the budget explanation just now, the details are not being explained yet. Maybe perhaps next week, if the parliament still exists, for us to convene and discuss about the budget. And honestly, I think the problem of the government in today's term is that we are too reliant on traditional revenue stream, Petronas, our palm oil, and as we all know, our economy is still in a very old setting or mode. We are not innovating enough. I think our SMEs are still struggling to rebuild their businesses after COVID. And hopefully, with all the announcements made just now, some of the incentives could help spur back again the rejuvenation of our SMEs, especially on digitalizing their operations. I think these are the things that could perhaps broaden our revenue base after we increase the productivity. But at the moment, I think perhaps I was also wondering why wouldn't the MOF suggest that we perhaps put a tax on our soft drinks, for example, a sugar tax, to increase that so that we can perhaps cushion or increase our revenue base to support the handouts that being announced just now, but those are not being mentioned by the minister. So I believe maybe he would like to discuss this in the debating session in a few weeks' time. But again, as it is, you're right. I think the government has not come up with the explanation or some plan on how to broaden the revenue base of our country. Yeah.
Sure, YB.
To increase revenue doesn't mean you need to increase the way you tax people. It can mean how you increase the income of the people, so your income tax increase. So the overall is how you spend your budget to increase the income of the people, so you can actually collect the income tax more than what you spend on that. So the whole thing is, how do you become a clever government? That you invest with a multiplier effect that actually causes or let the business gets better. I just give you an example. I was very surprised with the revenue collection this year,
Right.
last year or this year, where I think it's this year. It was estimated revenue collection to be 233 billion around that, but apparently because of the increase in income, because of the lockdown, that there is lifted, actually because of the increase in income of the companies, we actually collect more than 50 billion more than what we estimated. So one of the things that come to my mind, Prof maybe will differ to me, but I'm not an economist, but one of the things that I think we will have to do as a government is, how do we make our businesses earn more money? How do we make people earn more money? By spending the money, then we may not need to go, let's tax more people. Because when people have more money, they pay you more. But of course, from time to time, you have to analyze and see systematically and see where we can tax people. But I would actually argue that if we are clever enough as a government, there are a lot of instruments that you can use, non-tax kind of instruments that you can use to help government, to help business to earn more money. For example, you can actually make it very easy for businesses to do business in Malaysia. The ease of doing business in Malaysia. Because the moment you have a very easy, very transparent, you do not need to pay under table money. People want to invest in Malaysia because of our geographical location and many other advantages that we have in this part of the world. So I would say that the other part is, how do government have a PPP? Of course, it will increase the contingent liability to be able to say that to make those industry to be led by the private financed, and at the same time increase jobs and increase revenue for companies. Those are possible things, but I would let other speakers talk about this. I have examples of what we did during the ministry and how we do it, not to use government money, but use government as an institution to be able to increase jobs and increase revenue for companies.
Sure, that's very interesting, because I'd like to just quickly interject. Amongst non-tax instruments are also ESG compliance, for example. We've just had, of course, within the past calendar year, America actually blacklist a couple of the biggest producers in Malaysia because they're not ESG compliant. Thoughts on that, perhaps, Senator?
Yeah, I mean, right now we are living in an era where climate change is one of the major security problems for all nations, especially those who are we're surrounded by seas like us as well. And not only that, we also know, because we are heavily relying on foreign labor, the issues of human trafficking is still paramount when it comes to building our economy. But I just would like to get back to the issue raised by YB Yobiyin just now with regard to what the multiplier effect that we should strive for. The greatest multiplier effect or investment every time budget being tabled year in, year out is education. And we all know at the moment, at least 2 generations of school kids are having problems continuing their studies. These are what we call the pandemials, pandemic millennials generation, whose schooling experience has been stunted because of COVID. But on top of that, I think recently I've seen and read Prime Minister had made a statement that our professional skilled workers are still low. The nation need at least 45%, but at the moment we only have 26% skilled workers. But there's a catch-22 here. As we all know, when I read through most of the comments in LinkedIn and Facebook, most of the skilled graduates, engineers, especially engineers, they are complaining of their wages are basically stagnant. And with the high cost of living, they think that, being a skilled worker or skilled professional like in engineering and others wouldn't do much for their future. So most of our school leavers might reconsider on going to universities. So at the end of the day, by not having a lot of these people in our disposal, how can we build and multiply our economy further when it comes to especially high income sectors, which require skilled workers like engineers, doctors and others. So these are the things that I think the government must seriously address. I'm part of the government anyway now, but the ministry in charge, especially Ministry of Higher Education, how they package or plan their syllabus for the students must be relevant, and their partnership with the industry must always be close. And I think the government has established since previously, since PH government, the important TVET Council, which must be given more autonomy by the industry to push further to promote TVET across all sectors. I think that would be one of the ways to increase our revenue in the long run.
Sure. And of course, the National TVET Council has been allocated 6.7 billion ringgit as of the latest budget. Prof. Jomo, your thoughts on the overall allocation towards the education sector, which is 55.6 billion under this budget, which is significantly higher even than the previous one at 52.6. And what appears to be the issue always, because of the fact that generally and traditionally education always receives the highest allocation, and yet we have systemic and structural issues all the way from the fact that the school structures themselves are crumbling in many cases, such as in rural Sabah and Sarawak, all the way to even in urban schools and even semi-rural schools whereby even the toilets are not functioning on a basic level.
That's a very difficult question to answer within the context of the budget. Let's face it, education is a very complex issue. There are very difficult issues involved, especially in Malaysian society. And if you look at the amount of money which has been put into education, both at the basic levels as well as at the tertiary level, Malaysia ranks among the highest in the world, proportionate of the total expenditure. If you compare that with health, we spend very relatively little. The government spends little, and Malaysians also spend relatively little on health. Yet Malaysia comes out pretty good, pretty well on health indicators. It does very poorly on education indicators. To have a good discussion of this, I think requires very careful discussion, which is beyond the scope of tonight's discussion. So I really think that one has to look very closely at the complex issues involved in education. So, of course, I cannot disagree with the neglect of TVET and so on and so forth. But there's more to that than the usual things. I mean, the usual discussions about education have just gone round and round and round. We haven't made any progress, even though this problem has been recognized for decades. It's not a new problem. But I think what we do have now is that we are making a series of very serious economic decisions which are hugely problematic. If you think, for example, recently the government ratified the CPTPP. Now the CPTPP is going to cause huge problems for the Malaysian economy. It's going to affect adverse growth of the Malaysian economy in very serious ways. What is it going to do? We are going to have Japanese cars being imported into Malaysia on a preferential basis, and that's the main advantage to Japan. The second largest item which will be imported, according to all the projections, is plastics. But it's not just plastic products; it's also plastic waste. And we know, Yang Berhormat Bien referred to this earlier. We know what happened with there were over 100 licenses given for plastic processing, but more than 80% of the plastic which came in was not being processed. It was basically put into landfills in the country. So, it's all well and good to talk about, how we're going to get a big growth boost and so on and so forth. In fact, we are playing a very, very dangerous game, unwittingly getting caught in the new Cold War. Malaysia has benefited a great deal precisely by not taking sides in the new Cold War. And I don't know whether most people know that investment interest in Malaysia, particularly in Penang, has grown so fast over the last year. It is almost 8 or 9 times what it was in the previous period. Now that's a huge increase, and the main reason, of course, is that that Malaysia is seen as an attractive location because it is not seen as having taken sides in the emerging Cold War between the U.S. and China. So investors have been pushed to reshore and to so-called friendshore, and Malaysia is a major beneficiary of that. It doesn't mean that our policies have been great. Otherwise, it's rather that we have taken advantage of this conjuncture and we're doing reasonably well out of it. So, but we need a range of economic policy reforms, and that's why I completely agree with our 2 younger politicians there. About the fact that there are hardly any serious reforms in this current budget, despite all the rhetoric. But having said that, I do think that it is a politically expedient budget, which is going to raise a lot of problems and basically kick a lot of problems down the road without resolving them.
Thank you very much for that, Prof. Jomo. I think what's really clear is that you can clearly never decouple reform from policy as well as from even the tabling of a national budget in a country like Malaysia. On that note, though, we take a quick break. We'll be back right after for the last segment of Wacana English Edition's special on Budget 2023. Stay with us.
Have presence in all Southeast Asia markets, right? We have on-ground presence in all the countries in Southeast Asia except Vietnam. So from that point of view, we are well covered, and we have enough support for SMEs within the region to develop and grow for export business for themselves. Over the years, eBay has increased its footprint. Right now we are investing significantly in market development for SMEs in Southeast Asia. So our approach and our coverage within the market has increased tremendously. And what is also important is we've got into strategic alliances with FedEx, DHL and others within the region to provide a safe shipping ecosystem for our sellers as well.
Some political party are all talks. Like Pakatan Harapan, when they took over government for once, it was all just promises. And at least we can see during Prime Minister time, Datuk Sri Ismail Sabri time, in his 1-year period, he has done a lot. And of course, UMNO has always been doing the walking and the talking.
Muslim Pro has been around for a very long time, more than 10 years. The idea of Muslim Pro came about when we realized that people were starting to use mobile phones. And the first thing that we saw was this need to provide information for the Muslim community. Right? So one of the things that was badly needed at that time is to find out the prayer times. So when Muslim Pro was created, it was created essentially to be able to tell accurate prayer times. So of course, since then, the app has evolved and we've developed a whole host of other features all around the Muslim lifestyle. Halal food, halal travel, the Muslim lifestyle, family, parenting. So all of this content you'll be able to find in the Muslim Pro app.
Welcome back to Wacana English Edition for the Budget 2023 special with me, Tamina Kausji. Right, I'd like to direct this question first and foremost to Prof. Jomo. Now, let's look at the social welfare allocation, which is a 10 billion ringgit in total, Prof. And your thoughts on the fact that also a billion has been allocated for the Keluarga Malaysia Extreme Poverty Eradication Program. Your thoughts on the fact that, yes, there is now a sensitization at the higher levels of government about extreme poverty, but is this enough?
Thank you. I'm not sure how much the allocation is going to really help, particularly the most adversely affected by the recent train of events, beginning from the pandemic and also the more recent situation. The problems of higher costs are very difficult to deal with because they largely deal with talking about imported items such as fuel and so on, and some food and so on. So it's very difficult to do very much about that. So you really are tiding people over in rather adverse times. But I think the more serious problem is whether or not we are serious about not welfare, but social protection. We need to develop a system of social protection. Half a century ago, Tun Razak talked, when he set up SOCSO or Perkeso, he actually had a vision of a fairly comprehensive system of social protection, or social security as he termed it. That vision has never been realized because they basically stuck to 2 or 3 things and have never really progressed very much beyond that. That vision, we should have a discussion about realizing that vision. His son didn't do anything about it, and nobody else did very much about it. Now, these are the kinds of things which we need to think about. But we also need to make sure that the amount of abuse is minimized. It's no point going after a little subsidy and so on, cutting off the subsidy because you are very concerned about corruption. And this is the kind of mistake which was done during the Pakatan Harapan regime. So you really need to think very, very seriously about the kinds of systemic reforms which need to be introduced, and they need to be introduced in ways which are not adverse to improving the human condition, to improving the condition of Malaysians. And there's no point, for example, allowing the super exploitation of foreign workers, because Malaysian workers who are competing for the same jobs are also adversely affected as a consequence. And let's not forget that about 1/3 of our labor force today is actually foreign, and about 1/4 are actually undocumented foreign workers. So we are talking about a very, very serious situation which needs to be regularized, which we need to attend to. And then there are very easy things such as improving human nutrition. Right, it's now very scientifically established that the first 1,000 days are the most important for a young child from the moment of conception up to the age of about 2. And reforms should be introduced at that level to ensure that the future generations of Malaysians are healthy. And also at the school level, the Ministry of Health actually has a nutrition program costing about 2 ringgit per meal. 2 ringgit per meal, and they have superior outcomes in terms of both physical development as well as mental or cognitive development. Now, these are all well established. Okay. Now, instead, what we do is that we just pump in more money into the existing program, which basically gives the contract to foreign companies to supply these meals. So we have all kinds of meals, some of which include sugar, which we are trying to avoid, and nothing much is done about it. So we need to redesign this. And there was an attempt to try to discuss some of this when Dr. Masli was education minister, but unfortunately none of that got anywhere. But we really need to think about the content of these programs rather than simply pouring more money in without thinking about what the programs are and the consequences. In other countries, we have seen how these programs have been used to improve food security and nutrition. how farmers, for example, have been empowered, but also how farmers have been discouraged from using agrochemicals, especially those which are toxic, pesticides, and so on and so forth. So we have a virtuous cycle there of the Ministry of Education cooperating with the Ministry of Agriculture, cooperating also with the Ministry of Health. But right now we work in silos, despite all the rhetoric about all of government approach and whole of society approach. But those unfortunately remain slogans which are forgotten almost as soon after they are pronounced.
Thank you. Thank you for emphasizing that, Prof. Jomo, because of course that doesn't bring into question the allocation, which is of 777 million for the supplementary food plan program, which will likely benefit about 800,000 students. But once again, it's always about the execution of it. Right. From there, let's move along speedily into allocations for women and family unit support. There have been plenty of allocations, particularly for underserved communities amongst our women, for the B40. Do you feel, YBOBN, whether it is at the same time enough, though, some tax exemptions as well as tax exemptions on the payments for nursery and kindergarten, would that be enough to actually significantly and substantively increase Malaysia's female labor force participation rate, which really lags behind?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to chip in a little bit on the social welfare, and that includes the woman or maybe the underprivileged woman, and then we talk about women in general. Actually, what we have, what are the gap in our social welfare program? One of the biggest challenge is data. Actually, our welfare department data are not talking to other departments. So we do not have a centralized data integrated whereby we know this particular person receive how much from the government. For example, if this person belongs to the hardcore poor, and that we have been giving them some money in terms of giving them the fish, do we have a supplementary program to teach them how to fish, and how do they move out from it? So we have been having this mentality whereby people at the bottom of the pyramid wants to stay at the bottom of the pyramid, and that what we lack is a data whereby we systematically and scientifically to design program to move them out from that. So I think the first step towards an efficient allocation of welfare, no matter how much is that, is an integrated data in the government of all the income levels, and then you will be able to do. So that includes the OKU. That also includes the underprivileged women and single mothers, etc. But talking about women as a whole, I am not like a hardcore feminist, but I sometimes think that you have a particular program only for women, a few 100 million. But the one that you have for general is a few billion ringgit. And those are mainly men that apply for it. So whenever we think about mainstreaming women in entrepreneurship, and the mainstreaming women in leadership, let's just do this. Let's just have a mainstream thing, and then you put a quota and increasing every year that make women being the mainstream. While I welcome the particular for women, for the particular group, let's have a gender analysis on the budget. How much of this is particular for women, but what about the general one that is so many times higher? How much you give to the woman? I think we need to ask that question more than how much a women program will give, because politicians are very clever. So they will tell you, I am helping women. And see, this is a particular program I use to help women, but they give you a token. But then the general one, the one that is in the mainstream, gets well, I do not know. I don't have the data, so I will not say that the women don't get it. But let's mainstream women in everything that we do.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. We have, of course, had more conversations around gender-responsive budgeting in the past 2-3 years, which is great. But at the same time, facts remain. As of 2021, close to 5 million, or 68.3% of the female population in Malaysia was recorded as not being part of the labor force. Only time will tell whether the fairly generous budget allocations towards underserved women communities is actually going to help them to take part in the labor force.
Actually, I mean, I beg to differ that they are the lower the woman from the lower rank of the pyramid. There are many graduates, women graduates, that falls out of labor force because of childcare.
That
If
too.
you look at labor participation rates in Malaysia among the women, that you see a dip after their childbearing age, and that in some other countries there is a double dip, but in Malaysia that never returned because of the return to workforce. There is a gap. So we have a problem whereby we are difficult to keep women. Those are educated women, and that is a loss to Malaysia economy. So I give you an example of what we did in the Pakatan Harapan, not my ministry, on the women ministry. What they do it's a very good program where they actually have a workplace childcare. Use the 10 million ringgit, and then to be able in a year to have about 50 childcare in government agencies. If this can be emulated, I think in 2020 we get a 30 million. So they were trying to want to multiply it, but of course Sheraton move happened. But I think if we are able to give a systematically giving more workplace childcare, where women can actually to be able to think of how to close the gap between childcare and workforce, then we'll be able to bring more women back to work. So we are really seriously lacking in returning to work program, than just, give you some subsidies, give you some incentives. Nothing will happen.
Yeah, very rightfully observed, because of course the motherhood penalty aside, World Bank's 2019 report about removing all barriers for women's economic participation actually showed if that were done, we would stand to gain per capita USD 10,000 annually.
And don't forget, women make up most part of universities. There are more women in our public universities than men. And thinking that they will stay at home instead of contributing to the economy.
Very true.
Yeah.
Right. So on that note, though, let's quickly end it out with a couple of the digital and e-commerce related goodies that have actually been handed out, targeting more towards the youth populations. Your thoughts on that, Senator?
Yep. I think it's a good continuity from last year and even previously during Pakatan Harapan's government policy on e-wallet, e-pemula. I think these are very good initiatives that could help facilitate more youth to be part of the e-commerce. I think they are more familiar than most of adults in terms of spending their money, purchasing their goods online. And I think that will help transition our society to a cashless economy when it comes to retail. And not only that, I think the youth also will be more familiar with when it comes to anything to do with digital consumption, especially social media, as a platform of marketing, as a platform for a gig economy, and also for reskilling. I think there are many ways for youth of today, in order for them to be more competitive when it comes to securing more quality jobs, for them to use government initiative that they have been receiving, either through various grants or whatever agencies like MDAC has offered when it comes to reskilling and upskilling, to use that as a way to improve their employability in this more challenging labor market. So yeah, I mean, whatever government has announced just now, I think is good. That one I have to applaud the Minister of Finance for listening to the requests of the youth at large. Yeah.
All right. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Prof. Jomo, YBOB Yin, and Senator Wan Faisal. When we look at the entire overall budget 2023, I would like to go around once from all the panelists to get your final parting thoughts. Looking forward to the execution of budget 2023, perhaps beginning with Prof. Jomo.
We are not addressing the major challenges which the country faces, the national economy faces. And I'm very, very concerned that people are going to be carried away by the handouts in this budget and lose sight of the bigger picture. We need tremendous reforms, not necessarily popular reforms, but these are absolutely essential if we are going to move forward. Thank you.
Prof. Jomo. And Senator, your parting thoughts?
Yeah, as a member of the administration, I witnessed how challenging it is for the government to execute all the promises they've made during budget. And I believe the litmus test, as what we have discussed just now, is how best to ensure good governance are in place when it comes to rolling out all the goodies promised just now. And right now, the budget is very much hinged on political expediency of the Prime Minister, whether he can withstand the pressure made by his own party to ensure that whatever being announced just now is sincerely meant for the people or just a political ploy for next general election.
Thank you for that, Senator. And YB?
Assuming that we get to pass the budget, means there is no dissolution. I hope that the budget can be spent efficiently with a measurement of spending outcome. What is the spending outcome we need? We need to have a good measurement of spending outcome that have the economic multiplier effect in mind in all the government spending, especially in development expenditure. The other part that I think as a government we can always do is to devise smarter policies to make and also to build institutions to make things more transparent, make things easy for everyone, especially for the business community to be able to do business better in Malaysia and earn more money. And versus that of the workforce, my hope is that the money spent on them, whether it's from development, skills, education, all of it will be spent on the right way so that they develop and become more skilled and more valuable workforce, and that through that be able to earn again more money in their pockets.
Yeah. All about creating more value beyond just Budget 2023. All right, and with that, we've come to the end of tonight's episode of Budget 2023 on Wacana English Edition. I'm Tamina Kaushi signing off for now. Thank you all for tuning in and also for all your comments. We hope that you will join us again for the next episode of the show, Wacana English Edition. See you then.
Thank you.